We tend to think of death as, well, the end, an ending. But what if, for some people, it's actually just the beginning of their most important work? Today, we're diving into the pretty remarkable and, honestly often shocking, history of how the dead have served the living. It's a story full of scientific breakthroughs, really grim necessities, and our own changing relationship with the bodies we all eventually leave behind.
Now that's a provocative thought, isn't it? The idea that your greatest contribution to humanity might come after you've taken your last breath. As we're about to see, the dead have been our silent partners in some of the biggest leaps forward we've ever made, and it's forced us to constantly weigh that scientific progress against our deep-seated respect for the dead.
Okay, so for instance, back in revolutionary France, they were on the hunt for a more humane way to execute people. And they had to be absolutely sure their new invention, the guillotine, would work perfectly on the first try. So who helped them test its efficiency and guarantee a clean cut? Yep, the dead.
And how about this one? When NASA needed to figure out the effects of massive G-forces and cosmic radiation on the human body, but without, risking living astronauts on totally untested flights, who took that first ride into the great unknown? Well, pieces of them, anyway.
And long before we had those sophisticated crash test dummies who gave us the critical data we needed to make seatbelts mandatory and save who knows how many lives on the road, you guessed it, human cadavers. They are, without a doubt, humanity's unsung and very, very stiff partners in progress. So that brings us to our first huge question. How in the world did we learn to heal the human body without actually killing patients in the process? The answer, as you're about to see, well, it's pretty gruesome.
I mean, just try to imagine it. In the early 1800s, surgery wasn't just medicine. It was a spectator sport and a really brutal gamble. Just look at the case of a guy named Stephen Pollard. He was on the operating table for over an hour for what should have been a simple bladder stone removal. The surgeon was so bad at his job that people watching literally described the horrible squash of the forceps as he just fumbled around inside Pollard's body. Unsurprisingly, Pollard died 29 hours later.
And that case right there highlights the huge problem they had back then. To stop butchering the living, surgeons had to practice on the dead. There was no other way. And this desperate need for anatomical knowledge, it pushed the medical field into some very dark and morally complicated corners. So, how'd they get the bodies? Well, at first, dissection was actually a punishment for murderers. It was considered a fate even worse than death itself. But there were only a few criminals available, and that led to a severe shortage, which then led to the rise of body snatching. By 1828, it was a booming industry in London. The demand got so extreme that two guys, Burke and Hare, decided to just skip the digging part altogether and started murdering people to sell their fresh corpses directly to anatomy schools. But this need for cadavers didn't just stop in the 19th century. Oh no. In fact, as our technology got more and more advanced, we found new, and you could say, equally grim reasons to rely on the dead to protect the living. Let's just think about car safety for a second. You can ask a living volunteer to, endure some level of impact, right? But you absolutely cannot, ethically or physically, test them to the point of serious injury or death. But here's the thing. That's exactly the data researchers need to build safer cars. So to really understand fatal impacts, you need subjects who are already, beyond fatality. To get really specific, at one point, researchers needed to understand exactly what happens to a human face when it smashes into a dashboard. They calculated the injury threshold, that point of no return, at a force of 1,400 pounds. There is no living person on Earth who could safely volunteer for that experiment. And this is where we meet someone, or, some body, like UM006. That was the anonymous code for a cadaver used in a university impact lab. The researchers dressed him in a blue leotard, they masked his face for anonymity, and they literally used duct tape to prop him up in a car seat before simulating a crash. It sounds so surreal, almost bizarre, right? But the data from his final ride helps create safety features that save thousands of lives every single year. Okay, so from preventing violent deaths in car crashes, we're going to pivot to solving them after they've already happened. See, cadavers don't just help prevent death, they also help us solve it. But for forensic scientists, the big question has always been, how do you get a body to tell you exactly when its story ended? So, welcome to the body farm. It's this pleasant-looking hillside in Tennessee, except for one little detail. The people you see lying in the grass are all donated cadavers.
This is the only place in the world dedicated to studying human decay in all kinds of conditions, stuffed in car trunks, buried in shallow graves, wrapped in plastic, all to create a super precise timeline that helps police determine time of death and hopefully catch killers.
So what do they learn there? Well, the process is unflinchingly, almost mechanically predictable. First up is bloat, as all the bacteria inside us produce gas. Then comes something called skin slip, where the outer layer of skin separates. This can lead to a phenomenon called gloving, where the skin of the hand can be peeled off whole, just like a glove. And finally, you get liquefaction. The brain, because it's so soft and full of bacteria, is one of the very first organs to go, literally pouring out of the ears and mouth. Yeah, it's grim, but for a detective, this timeline is an absolutely invaluable clue. All of this incredible research, from anatomy all the way to forensics, it relies on just one thing: people willingly choosing to donate their bodies. And that brings us to the very personal choice that every single one of us faces about our own remains.
For centuries, the whole idea of dissection was just horrifying to people. But in the 20th century, things really started to shift. Big events like the first successful heart transplant showed the public the amazing, life-saving potential of donation. Then new laws made it way easier to donate. And as the cost of traditional funerals just skyrocketed, people started looking at donation as a practical, even altruistic alternative. Our growing understanding of biology kind of stripped away those old fears, reframing the body not as something sacred to be buried, but as a final, valuable gift.
And today, our options are really expanding. Traditional burial, as you know, uses up land and often involves toxic embalming fluids. Cremation uses a ton of natural gas and can release pollutants like mercury from our old dental fillings. But now, these new ecological alternatives are starting to pop up. There's one process in Sweden that uses liquid nitrogen to freeze-dry the body, which is then vibrated into a powder and composted, basically returning all our organic material right back to the earth. So from pioneering surgery to making our modern world safer to solving heinous crimes, the dead have quietly achieved some pretty incredible things. And it really forces us to rethink the end of life, not just as a loss, but as a final, and maybe even profound, opportunity to contribute something. It's a story of science, of ethics, and of dignity. So I think it's worth asking yourself, when you are gone, what will your final contribution be?